Good to see you.
And last but not least, Congressman Wittman.
All right, very good. Well, folks, thanks again. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to come and say a few words and then to take your questions, thoughts, and ideas. A couple of important things for the region that will be happening next week in Congress is appropriations bills. Most importantly, the Department of Defense appropriations bill that will be combined with the Labor, Health, and Human Services appropriations bill. Hopefully getting out of the House and Senate next week, which will be a very rare occasion where the appropriations bill actually gets done prior to the end of the fiscal year. The previous week we had a combination of appropriations bills, 4 of them to be exact, that passed out of the House and the Senate, so hopefully we'll get the Department of Defense, Labor, Health, and Human Services bill out, which will take care of 6 of the 12 appropriations bills. Having 12 months worth of money actually out the door when you can spend it in 12 months makes a big difference. So I don't like continuing resolutions. If you were to dream up a way not to run a government or a business, you'd come up with a continuing resolution. So this will be good. We got the National Defense Authorization Act out earlier than any time in the past 15 years, so things are actually happening the way they're designed to happen, and that is getting these things done on time. So hopefully that'll transpire next week. On the downside, though, is the remaining 6 appropriations bills will probably be done through a continuing resolution, which is not the way I would like to see it done. But getting at least half of them out of the door on time, I think, is a positive, especially for the region. I mean, for our region, if you look at the connection just with the Department of Defense, there's approximately 400,000 jobs here in the Northern Virginia region that are connected to some element of the Department of Defense. About $47.4 billion going to those companies. So for our region, it's a big deal. As you know, the last 2 years in a row, we've had 6 months of continuing resolutions and then 6 months of appropriations. You can't get things done consistently like that. The good news, too, is that we have been able to increase the number of dollars going to the Department of Defense specifically to rebuild readiness. So this year there will be an increase which will help in the training, the equipping, the maintenance, and also modernization of that force. So it'll be a big deal for not just the region but also for the state in getting that done on time. So that certainty is really a key for members of the military that serve there, as well as those companies that provide that support for our men and women of the military. So that's a good news element of what's happening. One other element that I want to point to that a number of us have led the charge on in pushing back on what we think is not a wise move, and that is for our federal employees. As you know, the deliberations between the House and the Senate as far as a raise for federal employees would propose a 1.9% raise for federal employees. We think that is necessary, since for the past 5 years now there hasn't been a raise for federal employees. Our members of the military in the past 2 budget cycles have received a raise, which is exactly what they need to receive. But if we're going to recruit and retain folks in the federal workforce, we absolutely need to do that. If you look at the federal workforce today, you have a lot of people there that are young, that is less than 5 years experience, a lot of people that are very experienced, that is more than 20 years of experience. But if you look at the in-between, not so much. So we want to make sure that we are retaining folks, and the way that you do that is you make sure that you keep their salaries commensurate with the salaries in other comparable areas. And we know in this region, if you don't have that increase, and again, it's more or less to keep up with the cost of living, since there hasn't been an increase in over 5 years, that we absolutely need to do that. Ultimately, Congress has the decision-making power there. While the President can suggest, it's ultimately the Congress that does the appropriating. So we've been pretty strong in that realm. Myself and several other members have led a letter, and we've actually gotten, I think as of last count, about 140 members, both sides of the aisle, to commit to say that we need to have an increase for our federal employees. So we want to make sure, too, that we're looking at after the federal workforce here in the region. Some other areas, too, that I think are extraordinarily important. If you look at where we are with the economy, the economic growth, GDP, all of the employment statistics, good news across those different fronts. The key is how do we make the conditions even better for this economic environment? And while you can talk about the tax code, good things have happened there, I want to make sure we're looking even further. And it's not just today capital, the tax code, but it's also what do we do in workforce development? What do we do in infrastructure to make sure that our businesses can indeed continue to grow? One of the areas that I think is extraordinarily important, and we've worked across the spectrum, including with Prince William County Schools, is career and technical education. If you look at the statistics about where we are as a nation today and where the future workforce is going, it's pretty plain about what we need to be doing and what all of us need to be doing, and that is policy at the federal level, policy at the state level, and what we can do to help localities in structuring their school system to focus on career and technical education. Now, Congress just recently passed the Carl D. Perkins Act, which is the legislation that provides some dollars and policy opportunities for states and localities to continue to emphasize career and technical education. One of the areas that I think we have to continue to work on, and we are holding forums about once every 4 months on average throughout the district with businesses, with educators, with parents, is to bring that consortium of groups together to make sure they understand what are school systems doing, what do businesses need, what knowledge, skills, and abilities do they need for their employees to make sure they can continue to grow their businesses. I think that's key to make sure that school systems are designing their curriculum and CTE programs around communities. And it's great. I mean, just here in Prince William County, I went to a company here that does advanced wood millwork. So they do very, very intricate millwork. And that company, as I walked in there, had 2 Prince William County School System graduates that are doing this complex engineering and millwork there on what's called a CNC machine, which is essentially a machine that does advanced grinding on wood. But these are high school graduates. I've come there because of the skills that they obtained here in Prince William County, are there doing that advanced work, making over $45,000 a year with benefits right out of high school. So to look at where we are today and making sure that our graduates are prepared for the jobs that are there, I think is key. Having businesses that will commit and say, listen, we are going to do that, whether it's businesses like Micron, who now is going to make a big expansion there with the foundry, and we visit there at Micron, the number of high school students that are working there in these advanced STEM jobs. Next door, Lockheed Martin, the same way. If you look at the systems they're putting together for our nuclear submarines, it is high school graduates there without a 4-year college degree, but with advanced training that are there constructing those systems that go on board the nuclear submarine. So the jobs out there are amazing. Here's some pretty astounding statistics. If you look today, there are 6.9 million jobs available in the United States. For the first time in a long time, more jobs than there are people to fill those jobs. But here's the astounding statistics. 75% of those jobs do not require a 4-year degree. So the question is how do we make sure that the skill sets of our students, of our children, match the jobs that are out there? Today, less than 30% of college graduates are actually have a job that's related to their degree. So we look at that mismatch there too. And if we talk about issues surrounding student debt, obviously there's the issue of existing student debt over $1 trillion, but if we want to address that going into the future, the question then becomes how do we make sure that our students have the educational profile to fit the jobs that are available, so that there's that match, so that if they do take on student debt, that they have a job that can help them retire it. Today what happens is many students don't have those opportunities because there's that mismatch there. So we want to make sure that their knowledge, skills, and abilities match the job opportunities. Today too, what we find in those job profiles is that these are career paths. I mean, these aren't dead-end jobs. These are jobs where you can start like I think it's IBS Millwork. At IBS Millwork, they start as an apprentice. They work their way to a journeyman. They become a master, and all through that career, they increase in earning potential. And it's across the spectrum. I was just at several companies that need drivers, truck drivers, commercial driver's license drivers, CDL drivers. They can take a person that goes through a CDL course, put them immediately to work, making $45,000 a year with full benefits. So the job demand out there is significant. If you look at the future, 60% of the jobs in the future will not require a 4-year degree, but they will require certification or credential, which means we have to make sure that we have that match with our education system and with the jobs that are available. 85% of those jobs will involve some element of science, technology, engineering, and math. So the pathway is clear. If we're really going to realize what is the unlimited potential in our economy, we have to have that match and that skill set for students that come out of our schools. And I want to give credit to the school systems here in the region, whether it's Prince William, Stafford, Loudoun, Fairfax, all of them are quickly adapting their curriculums around CTE, trying to get facilities back in, making sure that the CTE opportunities there are across the spectrum, making sure too that there's conversations with businesses in the area so they understand what do businesses need, how do we design curriculums to make sure that our graduates in the region are matched for those jobs that are available. So I think that's extraordinarily important. And we'll continue to do everything we can to make sure that match continues. And having these forums where we bring all the different partners in have been very, very successful, and we'll continue to do that. In fact, Karen, I think we have one coming up here in the region, don't we?
Yes, I'm at Germanna. Let me know if you want me to put you on the list to send out the invite. I'm happy to take all of your business cards.
Yes. We will make sure you get invited to that to make sure we make those connections with folks. Another element, too, of what is critical, not only for our economy, but also, again, an element in the educational realm and an element in the healthcare realm, is to make sure that we have access across not only the region but the state to high-speed internet. You know, one of the limiting factors there, even in a county like Prince William County, is we don't have all areas that are served by high-speed internet. And if you look today about what businesses need, if you're going to do business, you have to have high speed. Period. Pretty simple and straightforward. For our school systems, as they are getting students into the technology age, and in the schools, there's high-speed internet there. Students have tablet computers. I was just this morning at one of the elementary schools here in Prince William County, and you look at the connectivity there and what even elementary school students are doing. They have those tablets. They're doing assignments there in the classroom. The problem is when they take that tablet home and there's not connectivity at the home, then mom and dad have to put them in the vehicle and take them to the library, or take them to a place where they can have a Wi-Fi connection to be able to do those assignments. So it's critical for us to do those things across the state. I've been working with folks at the federal level, with the National Telecommunications Office there, as far as what they're doing policy-wise across the nation. Working with the governor's office. The governor has a very aggressive plan to have high-speed internet access across the state in 10 years. And that is in a definition that says if you're way off the grid, we're probably not going to be covered in that area, but if you're somewhere in relative proximity, we want to make sure we get that done. We've been very aggressive with that, with what we've been doing with the Virginia General Assembly. Last year, they doubled their budget in what's called the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative, VOTI as it's called. Now, there are not a whole lot of dollars there, but doubling it is a big step in the right direction. We were able to get in last year's federal budget $630 million into a program that will now start with the United States Department of Agriculture to get dollars to states, leveraging those dollars with state dollars and private dollars to continue to build out these networks. I think the money there needs to be technology agnostic, so whatever technology works best needs to be the technology that we put in place, the most cost-effective technology. We were just visiting Novec here recently, and they're working on a project to use satellite transmissions to provide coverage in areas where they don't have hardwired coverage or fiber optic coverage. So that, I think, is a great opportunity, as well as using high-frequency microwaves. The 700 megahertz spectrum there is very, very effective in getting to these areas. High-quality signal and gets the speed that folks need. All of those elements, I think, are things that have to happen. But to put it in perspective, this $630 million, while it is a lot of money and sounds like a lot of money, if you look at the total cost just for Virginia, we believe the cost is about $400 million in order to build out the system just in Virginia. So $630 million is a good start, but it is not the panacea. It's not going to be the solution to the problem by itself. Now, what I think will happen is if we can leverage those in different ways and cover as many people as possible in applying those dollars, leveraging state and local dollars, I think that we can do a lot. And then each year, I think Congress needs to come back and look at what's successful and repeat that and make sure we continue to push those dollars out there. It's not just incredibly important for businesses and for students, but it's incredibly important too to make sure that we have a network of healthcare coverage in areas where we have a lack of physicians. And telehealth is one of the emerging areas that hospitals are using today to reach areas where you just don't have the number of doctors in those areas, especially specialists. You know, specialists can now see more patients by working remotely. So in this situation, all you may need is a nurse there to help go through the diagnosis with the patient, the analysis of the patient's condition, the prescribing of medication, of other courses of treatment for patients. Those can all be done by telehealth and get health care out to areas. But again, it's contingent upon high-speed internet, especially in areas where you're bringing patients in. And even in the home, what we found is that you can provide even more effective in-home care by having that connectivity. So if a nurse goes there and needs a consult with a physician or a healthcare provider, they can do that right in home and get an immediate addressing of the patient's condition there. So all kinds of applications there for high speed, incredibly important, and those are things that we've been working on, continuing to emphasize here for our region, and we believe that those things will have a positive effect not only on quality of life but also on what happens with our economy. So those are the things that are in the offing for us. Obviously, there are other elements too. We continue to have conversations about health care. I know everybody in this room continues to look at the cost of health care. By any measure, it's out of control. I think there are a number of things we have to continue to address with health care, looking at, you know, how do we make sure that there's a way for us to manage costs. I want to make sure too that it's patients that are in control of how they consume, understanding the cost of what's consumed. There's not transparency right now either in what an insurance policy really covers, what the rate of reimbursements are for physicians based on what they agree to be paid by an insurance company, or whether it's Medicare or Medicaid, or if you walk in the door, you can't really tell what that cost reimbursement is because there's non-disclosure agreements with the insurance company. So I think having that transparency, making sure too people have choice about what coverage is best for them. I think that's an incredibly important part of how do you construct coverage that works best for folks. All those things have to be part of the debate about how we move forward with addressing the healthcare issue. So I wish I could tell you that there were lots of bills in the offing to be considered before this Congress concludes. Not a whole lot. There are some tangential bills that will have a small impact, but nothing that really, I think, addresses this in an overall sense. So that obviously will be part of the debate in this year's campaign. Folks will express their thoughts and ideas about what we need to do. We'll have that exchange of ideas, and then the 116th Congress will be charged with continuing along that road, because I know, as I said in talking to folks across the district, and I don't care where you're located or your political affiliation, this is an issue that needs to be addressed, period. So we are mindful of that. So with that, let me open up for your questions, thoughts, ideas, and concerns, and I'll do my best to answer your questions.
And we're going to go till about 2 o'clock, and then afterwards the Congressman will be around the alternate talk to him afterwards. So that's
Very good. Yes, ma'am.
My question, as a spouse of a retiree, has there been any thought for the state of Virginia to not tax that retirees pay?
A great question. In fact, in the last year's gubernatorial campaign, there was a proposal to lift state tax requirements on military retirees. A number of other states do that.
Yes, they do.
I think that for Virginia, as you know, today as we speak, we are the 4th fastest growing state as far as number of veterans. We'd like for that to continue because veterans have an awful lot to offer to our state as far as a very talented workforce, and understanding too that Virginia being a military state, there's a great fit there. So I would hope that the General Assembly, the governor, could work together and find a way to bring Virginia into that area where they can lift the income tax on veterans here in the state. I think it would be a great attractive measure for veterans to not only retire here, but to stay here.
And that's one of the things, as I said, I work with transitioning service members and veterans as well. That's one of the things that said, I had a gentleman in my office just this morning, and he said that, well, I think about going to Texas because Texas is not going to tax my retirement. Although the jobs are here,
Yes.
he said, but my cost of living will be much cheaper in Texas. And I said, yeah. I said, because for me, I pay property tax, then I have to pay Dumfries tax, then I have to pay another sticker tax. So we just almost taxed out.
Yeah.
So I just wondering if there's ever going to be any talk of doing away with the taxes.
Well, there's been some serious discussion about it. I think that there is a lot of data that would lead policymakers in the state, and again, not serving there, haven't served there years ago, but not serving there now. Obviously, it'll be their decision, but I think there's a lot of data that would lead them to see that there is an advantage to lifting the state income tax for veterans.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
You have a question, Rob?
Yes,
Yes.
Congressman, I know you mentioned that we have millions of jobs available for people, but mostly in technology and other things that require some technicality. But I am in the mundane business of selling groceries and
Yes.
food, and we're facing a crisis in a way that I have not been able to. We're in a growth mode for a long time, and I have not been able to fill up my staff, to fully staff, even though we have, package, benefit package and all that kind of better salaries and all that kind of stuff. But I face that even in North Carolina. You can't find a soul that can help you in a construction job, for instance, or anything. But particularly in this area, and I don't know if anybody else agrees with me, but the hospitality industry and the food industry is more the hardest hit because, I don't think people nowadays go to college and say, I'm gonna work for a grocery store.
Right.
That's more maybe, you fall in there, but it's not like a destination. So we're dealing with that. But the point that I want to bring is that at the same time that we have this shortage, 20% of my workforce is dreamers and people on the temporary, visa, which is like the one that comes with the disaster. The name is skipped from me.
Yes.
Huh?
Temporary protected status?
Yeah, temporary protected status. So, needless to say, we need these jobs, and the economy needs these jobs, the country needs these jobs. But, I think there is a little bit of politics in it, and then, the wrong people is getting the short end of the stick. So my question to you is that, what's your take on those two issues, and will we come with your support to, these people that are young, have the energy, and are good citizens that can enrich this country, or the other people that are on the temporary status, that can continue to feed their family, working for us and for everybody else around town. So.
Well, two different questions. One is on the dreamers. We absolutely need to address that issue. To me, it's fairly simple and straightforward. There's a way that you can do that, I think, where you can get agreement across the spectrum there to make sure that those individuals have legal status so they don't have to look over their shoulder and worry about what's going to happen to them. I think that has to be done. To me, there's agreement on both sides of the aisle. It is a hotly contested political issue. I'd love to see that get done. It always gets wrapped into other immigration issues also. Temporary protective status is another area too where it just gets continued. I think people in temporary protective status would like some long-term certainty about what happens there. There is a good bill in that addresses that, as well as the guest visa program, both the H1 and H2 programs that both need to be fixed, because it's a great opportunity for folks to come to the United States to work in jobs that are not going to be filled by folks here in the United States because of the nature of the jobs. You talk about the hospitality industry, You find that in the seafood industry. You find it in the seasonal lawn care industry, where those jobs are uniquely designed for people to come in, work, and then they go back home. There are legal mechanisms, they work. The quotas are so low, unfortunately, that the jobs fill up, and then what happens is, people then have to make a decision, whether it's employers who should be abiding by making sure they determine people's status, but many times they find themselves in a really tough position because the quotas have been met, and then it's a matter of, do I just not have workers, or do I not ask too many questions? That's not the way the system should work. There's several bills in that would fix that would try to redesign those systems to make sure that there are enough allowances for people to come in the country to fill those jobs. And as I said, there's not a competition with folks that are here working.
Right.
And then make sure too, as part of that in that bill, there's also provisions there for temporary protective status to make a final determination about people's status. And the temporary protective status is to say you've left a country because of issues surrounding how you feel that you are endangered based on conditions in that country, and you're here seeking asylum. As you know, we have a number of folks working across the spectrum there. You talk about your business, but not long ago I met with folks that are in the highway construction and paving business, and a number of their employees, really great employees have been here for a number of years, are under temporary protective status, and are always kind of looking over their shoulder saying, well, if this expires, what happens? Am I going to have to go back home? So I would agree. Those things absolutely need to have a long-term solution. And when you talk to people outside the political realm, what you find is that there's an awful lot of agreement. But then when it gets wrapped up in all these other elements about immigration, all of a sudden you find the window to be able to find the necessary votes to do that becomes pretty precarious. I think that ultimately it gets done. I think at some point it reaches a critical mass where we look at it, and especially I think now with where the economy's going, with more jobs than there are people to fill them, I think that's going to be the forcing mechanism to say you have to fix these issues, because the folks that are there as part of these, whether it's these visa programs, temporary protective status, or the dreamers, we need those folks as part of this economy. So I think that's a forcing mechanism.
Yeah, well, I like to Congressman, if I may, that the way I see it, and I'm just a dumb foreigner, like maybe 30 years ago.
Not at all.
But I think we need the leadership of the Republican Party. It is time to start playing politics.
Yeah.
It is time to really go for the country and forget about politics and whoever else is running this place.
Yeah.
And I hope that we can get there.
I couldn't agree more. We had some opportunities to be able to do that. Unfortunately, we never got to the critical mass of votes to be able to make that happen. We were close in several instances, and unfortunately didn't make it across the finish line. I agree. It's at a point where you say, we all know where everybody stands. We all know the variety of issues and ways that you can solve this. Let's solve it and get it done. To me, it's pretty simple and straightforward.
Question there in the back.
I just want to follow up with that too, because I'm in the same type of industry, and I do have to hire H-2B guys coming in to fill up our workforce, because the workforce isn't there for us here. We try, but it doesn't fill up. I hear you say this almost, we're there, I think we're. Is there anything that's definite or things you can enlighten us on to say, no, we're close, this is where we stand on this issue, this is the status, sure. This is in a more definite type of an answer?
Sure. Well, there is a bill there that addresses specifically the guest worker programs. And that bill, I think, would have enough votes if it got to the House floor. It's up to leadership to bring it to the House floor. I've worked with Congressman Goodlatte specifically for Virginia in the different areas of employment that are covered under H-2B, H-2A. Some of those things like seafood jobs would be moved under H-2A, which makes that a little bit simpler. It also frees up existing quota under H-2B that now immediately gets filled, so people get pushed out because they can't get folks into the country under that. So there is a bill there. There is a bill to address that. I've worked with Congressman Goodlatte to put that bill together. Our effort is just to try to get it to the floor for a vote, to get it through the committee and get it to the floor for a vote. As you know, we had two other immigration reform bills, got to the floor, got votes. The closest one came was 193 votes. I think if there was a little more effort put into it, you probably could have gotten to 218. Unfortunately, there was another bill competing with it that got fewer votes, and then between the two, instead of saying, how do we combine these, They put both in separately, and then we ended up with both of them being short of the required number of votes. So I think all the policy, I think we've had every discussion about the policy. I think people know here's the spectrum of what we can put together in a bill. I think the key is having enough political will to say, let's get it in a bill, let's work and make sure we get to 218, let's get that bill to the floor and get it done. Now, they did take the H1 and H2 provisions out of that because it made the other bill more complex. So what they're trying to do is to separate that out because of how people feel about that bill. But I still think that there's, and I talk to folks across the country, it's not just unique to Virginia, it's from Michigan to California to Texas to Florida. Everybody there in some way, shape, or form is touched by the guest worker visa program. So I think there's an awful lot of agreement there that we can get done. So it's not a matter of the policy perspective or the legislation lacking, it's a matter of, how do you have leadership work on this? It's not just forcing a vote on it, but it's working on it to find 218 votes on it and then making the necessary changes to be able to do that. That just unfortunately hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and this year, the H2B program, only half of the immigrants were really allowed. That was like 86,000.
That's 86,000. And then they came back and they, remember they did it by lottery. And remember then, if you didn't get picked in the lottery, then you were shut out, and then they opened the lottery up again. So many companies had to wait, and if you're in a business where you have a seasonal window, as the clock is ticking, your seasonal window continues to close, and that's all lost income. So you don't get to make that up because it's not like you just, move that forward.
You're preaching to the choir.
Exactly.
Casey and Mayor Rochelle.
Yeah. Yes.
Go ahead. I think she raised her
Oh,
hand before
okay.
I did.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Jennifer with the Prince William Education Association, also a Prince William County School employee.
Yes.
I love how you said with the federal workers, because we have a lot of people in Prince William who work for the federal government, and we have parents of students who work there, and that they should be paid so they, we don't lose them to other industries. Well, in education, we have that issue. We still have openings in the school division, whether it's for bus drivers, teachers' assistants, teachers. We sometimes like to say that in education, teachers are the job creators. You strongly spoke about, tech and, getting students ready for the future. And I'm all for that for CTE programs. My brother, he was not a college person. He needed CTE to go on to that. So how do we get, the funding for education and not have it diverted elsewhere, and making sure that we, pay our educators so they stay and we're not losing them?
I think that's a great point, and that's an issue that has unfortunately transpired through the years. My wife's a school teacher, elementary school teacher. This is her 39th year of teaching school. I hear it on a daily basis. What she deals with, whether it's how the classroom has changed, the administrative side, and she's in the same predicament that you all are, higher than the acceptable number of substitute teachers, making sure too that you have a pipeline of teachers available to teach, making sure you have salary structures that are able to retain teachers. And there's a big disparity across the state. The pay scales are very, very different. So smaller counties that can't pay as much as larger counties have a real challenge in not only recruiting school teachers, but retaining them. As you know, in Virginia, there is a very few dollars actually come from the federal government. There's some Title I dollars, and my wife's a Title I teacher, so she squawks all the time about saying, you give us all these requirements, but you don't give us the money to do it. I am right there as far as how the federal government dictates under both Title I and Title II. But what ultimately has to happen is there has to be a commitment at the state level to make sure those dollars come down. In Virginia, there's a formula called the composite index, and it looks at the ability for localities to pay, and places like Prince William County that are seen to have more opportunity locally in tax dollars, get fewer state dollars, and those localities that have less ability to tax get more dollars. Now, you can argue that the composite index is a very antiquated standard, and it does create, I think, still create disparities. And I know when I was in the General Assembly, we worked on it, never were able to really get to a point where we could find agreement. The only way that you can do that is in a year where you have additional revenue so that you can hold people harmless. We saw back during Governor McDonald's administration, they tried to make a change to it, and the change quickly got sidetracked. So the ability to change the state formula, I think, is still something that's out in the future. I think some things that we can do at the federal level are this. We've had some discussions. A few things happened with ESSA, which is Every Student Succeeds Act. And ESSA dropped more of the decision-making down to the states and localities. And as you know, the General Assembly last year had a number of bills looking at what were they going to require as measurements for progress in schools. A lot of debate back and forth about how much should be left to local school systems, how much the state should do, but ESSA pushed a lot of that down. The problem with ESSA is I think it still has a number of very prescriptive requirements, whether it's on testing or standards, and still doesn't provide the money for those things to happen, which is famous in what happens at every upper level of government. And the problem is at the local level you can't push any more of it down, so that's where it rests. Another element too that in the discussion on ESSA that we tried to put forward is to say take away some of the prescriptive requirements, or most of the prescriptive requirements in Title I and Title II, allow states and localities to work as to how they are going to measure success and progress for challenged readers in those areas, and take your resources, the limited resources that come from the federal government to localities, and put those dollars and fully fund IDEA, which is the legislation that covers our students with challenges. Because those are very, very expensive efforts that have to be undertaken for those students. And again, it's prescriptive. The federal government says you have to do these certain things. Students also have to undergo the same types of testing, so it's more and more of a challenge there. And as we know too, the dollar amount gets expensive pretty quickly on that. So what I'd like to see happen is for us to fully fund IDEA as far as federal dollars. That would take a lot of pressure off of some of the other programs that are there with states and local school systems. I mean, the whole concept of what's in Title I and Title II are concepts that every school system is already putting in place. I would argue that they probably know best for their school system rather than it being prescriptive at the federal level. So I still think there's some things we can do at the federal level that relieve pressure off of states and local school systems and let more of those dollars go toward teacher salaries. I mean, I look at it today and look at the amount of money that we spend on testing. If you just look at the amount of money we spend on testing, I think by any measure you could look at that and go, wouldn't those dollars be better spent in instruction rather than in testing? No disrespect, but if you work for a testing company, I guess you think it's great. But if you're in the classroom, you look at it and go, really? There's got to be a better way for us to do this. So I think there's still some opportunities for us at the federal level, as well as what we do in working with states and localities, to get more dollars to the instruction level, specifically for teacher salaries. And you are spot on. If we are going to emphasize an education system that is world-class, we have to be able to increase the salary of teachers. And I don't say that out of self-interest because of my wife, but I say that because of what I've heard and seen through the years. And I served on a local board of supervisors for years. And our biggest challenge each year was funding the school system, finding ways to get additional dollars for teacher salaries. And one of the things I'm most proud of there is because there was such disparity in teacher salaries in our county, we made a significant increase in one year. I believe it was around 18% in 1 year to be able to bring teacher salaries up. And what we found is the community was very supportive of that, because what we saw is teachers leaving the county because of the disparity in our salaries versus surrounding counties. So, I think localities and citizens are willing to do that, seeing that the dollars are going to be spent in ways that go directly to teachers.
Mayor Rochelle, then Riley, and then
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on what Carlos brought up. First of all, thank you very much for your willingness to engage language on the immigration issue. It is a
Yes.
very difficult issue.
Yes, yes.
I do think it's long past time for all the leadership on the federal level to proactively encourage adult, mature language when we discuss this
Yes.
issue. Dumping on immigrants is not going to work. From the perspective of Manassas Park, we're 35% Latino. We are a minority city. Every locality wants to believe that it has the ability to protect its residents. We choose to believe, our leadership chooses to believe, that everyone in Manassas Park has documentation. And we want to feel protected by the federal and the state officials. We don't want to feel that we are vulnerable to actions of the federal government. If we would perceive that, we appreciate it. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Sure, sure. Absolutely. Thanks, Mayor. I appreciate that. You're right. This is an issue that is long past due and needing to be resolved. And as I said, when you talk with individual members there's a lot more agreement than there is disagreement. And listen, I understand the politics of it, but we have to find ourselves
So
at a
I'm
point.
talking about the language that's
Oh, yes.
used. If we were to substitute any other minority group
Mhm.
for the way Latinos are talked about, it would be totally unacceptable in our society.
Well, I can speak for myself in that our conversations have been very constructive with the Latino community and how we communicate, how we advance the issues concerning the Latino community and how we address not only the community, but how we address individuals. And I think, what you have to do is lead by example. So I try to make sure in everything that we say and do and how we act reflect that and the respect that we have for the Latino.
Thank you for your efforts.
Absolutely, thanks.
Riley?
Appreciate it.
Educator in
Yes.
Prince William, and you mentioned ESSA, and I have to tell you the sigh of relief from, I believe, educators across the country with ESSA, and then Secretary DeVos, who is not qualified for the position. I mean, no experience in education, and I think we're public educators are to the point of, there's concern with charter schools and, privatizing public education. And the idea that, this school or this school division is failing, and instead of providing the resources that are needed to improve, it's let's go in and boom, it becomes a charter school. So I'm curious about your ideas or your thought on charter schools and supporting public education as opposed to supporting charter schools.
Sure. Well, both of my children were educated in public schools, my grandchildren in public schools. I think public schools work. I think that in Virginia we do a very good job of how we administer our public school systems. Obviously, the resourcing side needs to be further considered. One thing about Virginia, and I think Virginia does it right as far as charter schools, and that is in order for a charter school to exist, it has to be chartered by the local school board. So they are the ones that make the decision about how that happens. And remember too, the dollars that would go towards a charter school don't take all of the state dollars or local dollars away. Only a portion of those dollars would go to a charter school. So the total amount of enrollment is kept in the formula for what schools get under the composite index, but only a portion of that would go to the charter schools. They have to make up the balance, which I think is a good model because it doesn't take away resources from the public schools. It allows localities to say, we're going to be the determiner about whether a school gets chartered or not. And there are some good examples of successful charter schools. I'd take, for example, what used to be in my district, Southeast Newport News, a very challenged neighborhood down there. And some local businessmen came together and businesswomen came together, went to the school board, and formed a school called An Achievable Dream. It is mostly funded by the community. You have soldiers from Fort Eustis every morning that are there to greet students as they come in. They are challenged there as far as what they do in the curriculum. So it's not like the school is different than other schools. And the neat thing about it too is that every graduating class, based on full funding by the community, every graduating class has their college education 4 years fully paid for. There's a benefactor that comes out every year that fully pays for that. So, listen, those are great opportunities for us to say, in those situations, let's lift up those models where we see that things work. They're doing the same thing now in the city of Virginia Beach. So I think if you look at how you actually put in place the idea of charter schools, I don't think that charter schools are the solution to everything. But I think if you allow school boards in the city of Newport News, Dr. Kilgore, who's the school administrator there, loves that system. The school board in Newport News loves the system. Again, they work with them. They have fashioned it in a way that works for the city of Newport News, works in conjunction with the school systems there. I think if you have that cooperative situation where you don't take away resources from the public schools, you have an ability in these challenged areas for the communities to be part of that, because as you know, our education systems are only successful when it's not just the schools and the teachers, but it's the parents and community that become involved in that. And I'm always open-minded about ways that we do that. I am a believer, though, that we shouldn't be taking resources away from public schools that it could further exacerbate issues there, but ways that we can help. So I would say that the way Virginia does it, the way Virginia has it modeled, is the right way to go about doing it. Because again, it's about local control, and it's about making sure too that resources aren't taken away from public schools.
Susanna?
Yes, so being with an industry that is, on a hiring spree and that has experienced in the last several years kind of shortage or challenges in finding the mid-tier, mid-level, workers, and also being involved, with the CTE in Prince William schools, Manassas City Schools, Manassas Park City Schools, as well as on the state level with the CTE. I want to thank you for supporting the CTE. What else can the federal government do to help communicate to students, teachers, principals, and the community about the importance of the middle skill level jobs? Because even as we were, negotiating the expansion, looking at different construction, companies, they themselves have challenges to even, build and get us kind of in a pipeline for building, and they had to say no to some other companies that needed, some additions to be done as well. So it is the technicians, the technician level. And I hear across the board, we are not the only company in the city of Manassas or Prince William County that has those shortages. NOVA has been working alongside with us and created a new program or several new programs, but students are not enrolling in it. So somehow we just need to communicate, I believe, to students in middle schools and even elementary schools, and get them pumped up about these different opportunities. And CTE is for everyone, or should be for everyone. Not only those who would go and get certificates and 2-year degrees, it's also for the ones who would, they can be on a pathway to 4-year degrees. So they can choose. And also dual enrollment. How can you help from the federal government level to make sure that there's a wider variety of dual enrollment courses?
Well, Susanna, I think there's several things that can be done at the federal level. First of all is we have to emphasize in education policy at the federal level that communication about the total education experience has to start with parents and their children in elementary school. So I think being more active there so that parents understand there are opportunities for my child that don't necessarily include a 4-year degree, that my child can be successful. And also to make sure that they have knowledge about what happens in communities, so they know what goes on at the Micron Foundry. What do they do in building semiconductors there? So if my child goes to work there, they understand, wow, this is a high-end manufacturing job. This is a highly skilled manufacturing job. So for parents to understand that and understand that it's absolutely a pathway for success for their child to go into a non-college, 4-year college track job area. That has to start, I think, in elementary school, so that parents are there telling their children, yes, you don't have to go to college. You can pursue these other paths. Making sure too that as we have that communication, that we again have that business relationship with school systems, and I think those are continuing to grow. I know, obviously, here in Prince William County, they're doing a great job with Micron and others. Another element that I think that we can make the biggest impact at the federal level, besides just recently passing the Carl D. Perkins Act, which is the CTE enabling legislation, the second thing is looking at leveling the playing field for the access for resources for students. And I say that because if you are coming out of the military and you are going to school, either you or your child under the 9/11 GI Bill, those dollars are available for 4-year schools, 2-year schools, and career and technical education. But if you go to get a Pell Grant to fund your education, Pell Grants cover 4-year schools. Until recently, they didn't cover, but now they do, cover 2-year schools, but they do not cover career and technical education. So if you want to close the loop, it's not just making sure that you communicate with students and their parents when they're in the elementary school level, and so parents know what these jobs are about, but it's also saying, okay, when we are providing access for these education dollars, let's make sure that Pell Grants cover what the benefits cover for our military under the 9/11 bill. Let's make sure it covers career and technical education. So we have some efforts there to try to make sure legislatively that we allow those Pell Grant dollars to follow the student to the career and technical education areas. And that allows them to pursue those certifications and credentials once they get out of high school to go and work at a place like Micron or any other place where they need an advanced certification. So we have to do that. Dual enrollment is another one of those areas too that, again, can be covered under Pell Grants. If you're a high school student and there is a tuition element of you doing dual enrollment, whether it's in a place like George Mason or whether it's in Northern Virginia Community College or Germanna, wherever it may be, and there's a fee involved in that. A lot of times school systems have an agreement with those community colleges where the fees are taken up by the local school system, but when they're not, then we ought to make sure that those Pell Grant dollars are available for the dual enrollment side, because I don't want that to be an impediment to students say, well, I can't do dual enrollment because of the tuition dollars involved with the schools where you'd be taking those courses.
All right, one more question.
Yeah, actually, not a question, but more just a comment and an offer to you. I first of all, Congressman, I wanted to thank you for coming here and letting us all tell you what we want you to do for us.
Yes.
Which is your job.
Yes. Yes.
But I also want to remind you and make sure you know that we are a resource for you.
Yes.
That the Chamber is a resource for you. You look around this room, the expertise, subject matter experts in different fields, and what I think has been amazing to me just in my short time serving as chair, our business community represents certainly a wide diversity of political points of view.
Yes.
But when we sit in our policy meetings and in our economic development meetings and in the meetings that talk about the issues that affect people day by day, it's amazing how well aligned we are.
Yes.
I think that's a good example. But I also just want to remind you, I know you have Russ's phone number. I hope you will feel comfortable reaching out when you have a constituent issue or anything else that the Chamber can be of help with.
Well, that's great. And the same with our office, too. If you have thoughts or ideas about things, or you hear things going on in Washington, and you say, what's going on with this piece of legislation, or I heard this, or tell me more about that, let us know, because we're glad to pass down some of the more in-depth information, because a lot of times what you pick up through media sources or other is just what I call the 40,000-foot flyover. So you look at it and go, well, how are they going to do this, or what are the details here? Let us know, because we are glad to provide you the details, especially on issues that come up. Many times issues are thrown out in Washington, sometimes not even in the form of a bill, and you look at it and go, well, who would do that? Many times they're kind of trial balloons that are floated to see what type of feedback do you get, and we can let you know, is there a piece of legislation out there that's pending on this? Is there a piece of legislation that has a number of co-sponsors? Is there a piece of legislation that's going to get before a committee? Has the committee taken up legislation? Is it likely to get before for a vote? And what that does is informs folks, and it also gives a level of perspective and where that thought is with that. Because let me tell you, there are a lot of bills out there. I think we are now up to 6,500 pieces of legislation in the 150th Congress. And out of the House, I think only about 600 of those bills have actually passed. So you can see in perspective, lots of ideas thrown out, only about 10% of them actually make their way. And then again, they have to get to the Senate, and the Senate takes up an even smaller portion of those bills. So the likelihood of those thoughts and ideas making their way actually into policy is a long, arduous process. But I want to make sure that people can hear from us specifically what's happening with those issues. And then if you have thoughts or ideas to say, well, this concept is a good one, but have you thought about these things? it gives us an opportunity too that if those bills do get before a committee or get to the floor, that we can amend them and we can say, have you thought about adding this provision or taking this provision out of the bill? So it really helps us to be active in fashioning legislation that protects and guards and advances your interest here. So we want to make sure we have the opportunity to do that.
So last question, and then the congressman will be staying around for a little bit afterwards, I've been told, so you can chat with him after that.
Maria Wells with the Virginia Employment Commission. A couple of months ago, I read an article regarding the Department of Labor releasing a certain amount of money, millions of dollars for programs for those that are ex-offenders.
Yes.
And the Virginia Employment Commission, especially the Prince William local office, we are working on 2 initiatives. One, ex-offenders or second chance citizens, as well as those that have other abilities or disabilities. And my heart is to be able to not only have the CTEs, but also OJTs for those. And reading this article, with all of the millions of dollars that was allocated, I saw nothing that talked about that, how they would be spent. And so I was wondering if there are any, as I've been doing research to try to develop a program to prevent recidivism for not only ex-offenders, but also those people that are homeless as well. We have lots of people that come into our office who are homeless. So there's populations, while I am sensitive to all of the other demographics in the room, those are 3 homeless, those that are ex-offenders, as well as those with special needs. The career pathways for those populations are very small, and there's not very much conversation about how do we help those populations that do contribute to the economy, who are valuable people in our community and who do need to not a handout, but a lift up.
Well, there have been some good conversations. One, let me talk about ex-offenders. The big key there is getting them reintroduced into society. The only way that you do that is they have to have a job, because if not, they end up right back in the same cycle, end up back, whether it's in a jail or a state correctional institution. That doesn't do anybody any good. And I think there's a rather easy way for us to take nonviolent ex-offenders and be able to get them reintroduced. A couple things have to happen is, one, you have to do some criminal justice reform. So there are some really good bills on criminal justice reform out there that are bipartisan bills. These are not ones where you have divisions. These are things that I think can easily be done. The biggest impediment, and I'm sure you see this, that we hear, whether I talk to folks that are in the communities that try to get these ex-offenders reintroduced, whether they're folks that work in the jails and at the state correctional level, there's not a whole lot that's done to reintroduce these ex-offenders. It's like, here you are, here's your personal belongings, and you're on your own. So we've got to do more in that transitional element. But one of the things, too, is we have to make sure that employers understand their risk. Because many employers misunderstand that and go, hey, I'm not going to hire any ex-offender, especially if they look at it and go, felony, sorry, whether it's a nonviolent felony or not, they just won't even give consideration. Many times it's a misunderstanding of what their liability is. So what we try to do is to say, let's make sure that we explain liability to employers and that we have insurance opportunities for those employees to insure themselves against that one case in 1,000 where somebody doesn't do right, and that they're protected in that. So we have to make sure that that's part of it, and I think then you can get more employers to say, yes, I'll give somebody a chance. The unfortunate part about what's happening today in many instances is those ex-offenders go and apply and apply and apply, and they're truthful on their job application. They say, yes, here's my past criminal record, I'm going to tell you exactly what I've done. And then they keep getting no, 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 no. So what do? Eventually what happens, they leave out of their application, they get hired, they end up being a stellar employee, and then one day, unfortunately, somebody finds out about their past, and immediately they're separated, and that's unfortunate. What we've got to do is to find a system that doesn't penalize them for being truthful about their record, and especially, the record of nonviolent offenders successfully being reintroduced in society and working well in a job, I think speaks for itself. So we have to be able to do that, help employers understand, help them understand what their risk is. When you talk too about those that are disabled, I like to call them able. They just have different abilities than others. The one thing that's an impediment there is our Social Security disability insurance situation penalizes them if they get a job where they work more than a certain number of hours a week, or they make more than a certain amount of money. We have got to take that away, because you are disincentivizing them to improve themselves, to get a job at a higher skill level. So it's mindless to say, oh, you can only do this, or only make so much, or only improve yourself so much. That's an impediment. And in fact, I've had many employers tell me, Rob, I would love to be able to, to enhance this employee's job duties, to enhance their salary, but they tell me, no, I can't work more hours, I can't make more, because if not, I lose all these other benefits that they rely upon. And many of them are living independently. They've gotten to the point of living independently and could do even more if they're allowed to do that. So those are some things at the federal level that we could do. Change Social Security policy and the criminal justice reform bill that provides for insurance opportunities for employers, and really make sure that we lift some of what they see as risk, I think would go a long way to help in what you're doing, and that is getting these ex-offenders reintroduced, getting folks with different abilities into advanced job opportunities.